On the evening of October 17, 1989, tens of thousands of fans were settling into Candlestick Park for Game 3 of the World Series, an all-Bay Area showdown between the Giants and the A's, when the ground underneath them started to move. It was 5:04 in the afternoon, about half an hour before first pitch, and a magnitude 6.9 earthquake was tearing along the San Andreas Fault. Al Michaels got out half a sentence on live television before the feed died, and what started as the biggest broadcast of the baseball year turned into the first major American earthquake ever carried live into people's living rooms. 63 people died that day, and the World Series sat frozen for 10 days, which is still the only time in history the Fall Classic has been stopped by anything other than the weather. And here's the part nobody in that stadium was thinking about while the upper deck swayed. The building they were sitting in had a survival rating, whether they knew it or not. Every ballpark does. A stadium's odds in an earthquake come down to one deeply unglamorous question, which is what year it was built and which disaster had already scared the engineers by then. Concrete poured before 1971 follows one rulebook. Concrete poured after 1994 follows a completely different one. And the gap between them is written in collapsed hospitals and cracked freeways. So what we're really ranking today is a fossil record. Each of these 10 ballparks is a snapshot of how much its builders knew about the ground that they were standing on. So without further ado, we're counting down from the one I'd least want to be sitting in to the one I'd genuinely take my chances in, and a couple of these are going to catch you off guard. Number 10, Oakland Coliseum. I want to be fair to the Coliseum because it caught a lot of hate over the years for the sewage and the possums and the concrete slab they called Mount Davis. Structurally though, it's a 1966 build, which means it went up 5 years before the San Fernando quake rewrote California's code, and it spent decades sitting a short drive from where Loma Prieta did its damage. It's old, it's exposed, and it was already considered one of the least sound parks in the league. But the reason it lands at number 10 is almost poetic, because the Athletics looked at all of that, played their final Oakland game in September of 2024, and left for a minor league field in Sacramento on their way to Las Vegas. Some might say that the most earthquake-honest decision any franchise ever made was deciding not to be there anymore. Number 9, Angel Stadium. Angel Stadium in Anaheim has the same core problem the Coliseum does, just without the drama of a team fleeing town. It opened in 1966, so its bones predate modern seismic code by a comfortable margin, and Anaheim sits inside the same tangle of Southern California faults that keeps Los Angeles up at night. It's been renovated plenty of times since then, and renovations genuinely help, but you cannot fully retrofit your way out of a foundation that was designed before engineers understood how the ground actually behaves during a quake. It survives a moderate shake. I would not want to be the one testing it on a big one. Number 8, Dodger Stadium. Dodger Stadium is more interesting than its age lets on. It opened in 1962, which makes it the third oldest ballpark in baseball, only behind Fenway and Wrigley, and 1962 is deep in pre-code territory. On paper, that should sink it. What saves it is where it sits, because the Dodgers carved the whole thing into Chavez Ravine, moving an absurd amount of earth to seat the park into a hillside rather than perching it on a soft valley fill. Solid ground shakes far less violently than loose soil, and that sitting quietly buys back some of what the calendar takes away. It's an old park on good dirt, which is a better place to be than a newer park on bad dirt. Number 7, Nationals Park. This is where people start to get comfortable, and I'd push back on that a little. Yes, Nationals Park opened in 2008, and it's built to modern code, so the structure itself is sound. The reason it's on this list at all is a Tuesday afternoon in August of 2011, when a magnitude 5.8 quake struck out near Mineral, Virginia, and rattled Washington hard enough to crack the Washington Monument and knock stone loose from the National Cathedral. The entire East Coast had quietly assumed it didn't do earthquakes, and the ground corrected that assumption in about 15 seconds. The park itself would probably be fine. The city around it is a different conversation, because half of DC was built by people who never once planned for this. Number 6, Chase Field. I'll be straight with you about Chase Field in Phoenix. Arizona is not exactly earthquake country, so if you're picking a place to ride one out, you could do a whole lot worse. What earns it a spot is that giant retractable roof, because a heavy roof is a lot of mass sitting way up high, and mass up high is precisely what you do not want swinging around in a serious shake. The risk here is low, but low and zero aren't the same word, and that roof is the asterisk. Number 5. Petco Park. Petco Park comes with a detail most San Diego fans would rather not know, which is that the Rose Canyon Fault runs almost directly under downtown, a few blocks from the ballpark. San Diego spent a long time thinking of itself as the mellow, low-drama corner of California, and the fault under its feet never got that memo. The good news for Petco is timing, because it opened in 2004, well after the code got serious, so it was built by people who already knew exactly what was down there. It's a modern park sitting on top of a very real threat, which is a strange mix of reassuring and unsettling. Number 4. Wrigley Field. I'll admit some hometown bias here, because I'm in the Chicago area and I've made my peace with a lot of things about the north side that have nothing to do with tectonics. Here's the funny part. Wrigley opened in 1914 with exactly zero seismic engineering, because in 1914, nobody in Chicago was thinking about faults, and yet it might be one of the safer parks on this entire list. Not because anyone designed it that way, but because the Midwest mostly sits far from the action. Which is the whole point of this video, honestly. Wrigley isn't safe because it's well built for an earthquake. It's safe because of where a couple of glaciers happen to leave it. Survival here is an accident of geography, not a feat of engineering. And that distinction is about to matter a lot. Number 3. Busch Stadium. Busch Stadium in St. Louis is the one I most wanted you to sit with. St. Louis feels like it belongs in the safe Midwest bucket right next to Wrigley, and that instinct is dead wrong. Downstate sits the New Madrid seismic zone, and back in the winter of 1811 and 1812, it produced a run of quakes so violent they rang church bells in Boston and briefly ran the Mississippi River backwards. Busch itself opened in 2006 and is built to modern standards, so the park would very likely hold. The problem is everything around it, because unlike California, the middle of the country never developed an earthquake building culture, so most of the region went up under the assumption that the ground would stay still. FEMA has modeled a major New Madrid quake at tens of thousands of casualties, and the grim reason that number runs so high isn't stronger shaking, it's weaker buildings. Busch, for all intents and purposes, might survive. St. Louis is the part that keeps the engineers awake. Number 2. Oracle Park. Number 2 brings us right back to where we started. After Loma Prieta turned Candlestick into a punchline, the Giants built themselves a brand new home, and Oracle Park opened in 2000. That date is the entire story. It went up after San Fernando, after Loma Prieta, and after Northridge, which means it carries every hard lesson California paid for across 30 years baked directly into its design. It sits close to the water, which isn't ideal, but it was engineered by people who had already watched 3 separate disasters teach the exact same lesson. This is what a ballpark looks like when it's built by a state that finally stopped being surprised. If the Bay shakes again, Oracle is the Bay Area park that I want to be sitting in. Number 1. T-Mobile Park. The ballpark I'd take over all of them is T-Mobile Park in Seattle, which sounds insane right up until you hear why. Seattle sits in the shadow of the Cascadia subduction zone, the fault that can produce a magnitude 9, the true worst-case scenario that keeps American seismologists awake in a way that even the San Andreas doesn't. And that's exactly why this park wins. When they built it in 1999, they refused to set it on the soft landfill it's surrounded by. They drilled the supports straight down into bedrock, so the whole structure is anchored into solid rock instead of floating on soil that turns to liquid the moment it shakes. Less than 2 years after it opened, a magnitude 6.8 hit the region, and the park barely blinked. The scariest fault in the country produced the sturdiest ballpark on this list, because these were engineers who built for the monster they knew was coming. That's the whole thing in one sentence. So that's the ranking, and if there's one idea I want to leave you with, it's that a stadium's earthquake survival was mostly decided before the first pitch was ever thrown, by the calendar and by whatever disaster came right before the concrete got poured. The old California parks are living on borrowed time and good retrofits. The forgotten middle of the country is a lot more exposed than it wants to admit. And the safest bet on the whole board is the one sitting closest to the biggest fault, purely because those were the people who took it seriously. My honest takeaway, and I say this as a guy who has now looked way too hard at ballpark foundations, is that being scared of the right thing is the only real protection any of these places have. Loma Prieta scared California into building better. Nobody's been scared into building better in St. Louis yet. Let's just hope the first lesson there isn't the expensive kind. Tell me down in the comments which one surprised you the most. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys